A rough one, Mrs. Overstreet?
Yes, Hattie, a very rough one, but if there is a God above, that boy will survive.
Mrs. Overstreet, what do you want me to do with this?
Wash it with the rest.
I don't think I can get the blood out of the fabric. Should I just burn it, ma'am?
No, Hattie, just do your best. And when it's dry, we'll hang it from the flag on top of the cupola. That young flag bearer who left his blood behind courageously took a lead ball in service of his country. His blood will illustrate to the entire population of this wretched town the measure of our devotion.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, and Hattie, on your way out, could you please ask Sergeant Pembroke to send in that woman who's waiting in the foyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Mrs. Overstreet. That Negro at the door, wearing a Union Army uniform, no less, did not even show me in. Just pointed. Thank goodness I don't need anybody to tell me where the ladies' parlor is in this house. Oh my!
Oh, do pardon my appearance, Mrs. Frobisher. I've just now spent the duration of 3/4 of an hour digging a bullet out of the groin of an 18-year-old. Needless to say, the whiskey was not enough to quell his relentless screams. I am, inside and out, quite disheveled. Please have a seat.
Oh my! Is the Union Army so deficient in the number of physicians that they have to employ the general's wife to tend to the wounded?
All the usual locations and all the usual personnel were unavailable. In addition, Mrs. Frobisher, this is my vocation. I am a nurse.
You're a working woman then. The wife of a general.
What can I do for you, Mrs. Frobisher?
The chintz! Oh, excuse me, Mrs. Overstreet, but would you rather remove that sole apron? The chairs are from Bentley's in New York, and the fabric's imported from France.
Yes, they're very comfortable.
I know a proper lady such as yourself has a tasteful eye indeed, and a high regard for quality and beauty. No doubt your own home is furnished in a similar fashion.
Oh, surely, Mrs. Frobisher, you did not come here to compliment my taste.
Well, yes. Actually, I came here today to ask for favors or requests, Mrs. Overstreet. As we are both women with delicate sensibilities, I know you will understand tender considerations of the heart, something our husbands cannot grasp, to be sure. So, woman to woman.
Yes, woman to woman?
I understand your husband, the general, is the military governor over the city for the time being. And you know those draperies are silk and the cigar smoke. Do you prefer we move to the gentleman's parlor?
Oh, no, I'm comfortable here. Well, go on. I trust you've been thoroughly rehearsing this speech. You were saying, my husband is military governor of the city.
I trust that our beloved home has served the general's purposes well thus far while we've been out in the country.
Quite adequate for our needs, I should say.
Adequate, yes. Well, you see, Mrs. Overstreet, I have 7 children. Seven surviving children. 7 dear ones who have suffered much since this conflict began, including grieving the valiant battlefield death of their beloved brother Isaac. Imagine those sweet hearts bearing that grief while being shuffled from place to place, dodging the horrors of war. Well, currently, believably, we are back in our hometown. We are very crowded at the home of my sister, who has 6 children of her own. So we are understandably anxious to come back here to our home for some much needed comfort and solace for the children.
Well, as you indicated, Mrs. Frobisher, This house is a good size and quite adequate for our needs, as we have a very large staff of military men housed here. Oh, that stain, that won't come off. I'm afraid this house is stained forever. A cigar was extinguished on the surface. Oh, not mine. It belonged to an honored guest of the general's, a fellow officer, General William T. Sherman.
Surely, Mrs. Overstreet, you would not allow some person to behave thus in your own home back in Connecticut.
Massachusetts.
I do ask that you at least have the Christian consideration to respect the property of others.
May I remind you, Mrs. Frobisher, that you are occupied by an army that has defeated your forces. At this point in time, the entire town is the property of the United States Army, and I am an agnostic.
Oh.
Mrs. Overstreet, one of the guests of one of our staff members left it on the floor, the third hallway floor, 4th time this week. Oh, pardon me, Mrs. Overstreet, I didn't know that your company was still here.
It probably belongs to the naked woman who's passed out in the back bedroom. You can put it there. When she comes to, she will find it.
Yes, ma'am.
Back bedroom? My children were born in that bed. Hattie!
Mrs. Frobisher, you're back, ma'am?
Hattie, where have you been? We left you in the city to keep an eye on the house.
Well, yes,
Hattie has kept a good eye on the house. Indeed, she has been invaluable to the Union. She is our laundress.
You're working for the you're serving the Yankees now?
No, not a servant, no ma'am.
No, Hattie is paid for her efforts. Hattie has earned enough to generate quite a savings. Hattie, didn't you say that you were very close to having the funds to buy a house on 4th Street, wasn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
Number 14, I believe.
Number 14? 4th Street? Brick house? That's the home of my husband's twin sister.
Well, she's planning on selling, and Hattie is planning on buying. Seems the white residents are moving out of the city for some reason.
Well, she'll never sell to them.
The paper's already been drawn up. Isn't that right, Hattie?
Yes, ma'am.
Impossible.
I suppose the current residents will go looking for a town that is not yet occupied in the hopes that their cause is not yet lost and some miracle will occur to make them victorious. What a boon for the freed colors.
Outright lies.
Mrs. Frobisher.
Girl, has anyone asked you to speak?
Excuse me.
Can't you control your girl?
My girl?
Heed my words, Mrs. Overstreet. They will walk all over you if you let those.
You know what, Mrs. Frobisher? I will buy that house, and there's nothing that you or no one else can do to stop it.
Oh, we'll have none of that in my house.
Your?
Yes, Mrs. Frobisher. Now sit yourself back down on the French chintz.
Mrs. Overstreet, the Lord saith, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, or let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 17. So, to continue with our previous conversation, if there's any sort of tax or donation we could make to your forces in exchange for the return of our property.
Your property.
Hattie, I am disgusted by your insolence and betrayal. You are our most trusted.
Wouldn't a dog bite the hand that beats him if he knew he wouldn't be beat again?
I don't know I'm engaged in a conversation with you. Mrs. Overstreet, I beg you to think about how utterly suffocating it is for us packed into that house.
We were 6 to a room in the quarters out back.
Why, of all the...
Well, there you have it. Hattie has solved your problem. Those quarters are available.
Mrs. Overstreet, I implore you to think about what we've endured. I lost my son. My sweet-faced baby, Northern Bullet, cut him down in Antietam.
I am sorry for your loss.
It is devastating to lose a son. It's devastating, Mrs. Overstreet. Our weeping has overtaken us completely. This crushing gloom hangs over us. Hasn't our family suffered enough? Enough! Mrs. Overstreet, woman to woman.
This war has been a tragedy for so many.
Indeed, Miss Overstreet, indeed. As I mentioned, we'd be happy to pay some sort of tax.
Well, I would have to persuade my husband.
Mrs. Overstreet, don't.
I know you have no children and can't possibly understand.
I have an entire regiment of sons.
Well, yes, of course, but I'm talking about my baby, cradled in my arms, my little boy, my son.
No, you don't. No, you don't. I have a son too. I have a son, Mrs. Fulcher. A son I haven't seen in 20 years. A son that was everything to me. And he was sold like livestock. Sold away from me when he was 8 years old. 8! Sold to a plantation hundreds of miles away from here. Where's my son, Mrs. Fulcher?
To think we treated you like family.
My son was your family. And that's why he was sold. So you didn't have to look at his light-skinned face and those golden curls. You know what happened to your son. I have to bear the agony of not knowing what happened to mine.
Do you not know to whom you present yourself as slaves to obey? You are their slaves to obey, whether it be of sin that leads to death or of obedience that leads to righteousness. Romans chapter 6, verse 16.
I am the Lord your God, and I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. So saith the Lord. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. And the just shall be like the shining sun, and it shall shine brighter on a perfect day. And that's Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18. And I ain't nobody's girl. Praise Jesus.
Patty is right. I'm sorry you wasted your time here today. And now, Mrs. Frobisher, I believe it is time for you to leave.
You Yankees, you come here and take everything. You take it all and leave us with nothing. And we've never done anything to you. You thought you could come here and tell us how we think is wrong, how we live is wrong, how we believe is wrong. You thought we would thank you for showing us the error of our ways and welcome you as saviors, following you back into the Union like sheep. Well, we are not sheep, Mrs. Overstreet, and I don't think you realize what will happen when our forces come back and take back the city. There will be no mercy for Yankees or betrayers. God's vengeance will be upon you.
I think the target of God's wrath is misplaced in your thinking.
This from an agnostic. You and your army have desecrated our home with Negroes and wanton women's harlots in my marriage bed.
Well,
I never in all my life.
Well, if your husband had been killed in the battlefield instead of hiding out in the countryside, who knows what you would do to feed those precious children?
Don't you dare speak of my children. And I did not come here to be insulted in my own house.
No, you came to beg for it back.
And you're not getting it back.
Indeed.
You abolitionists have it so easy. Once your husband's assignment's through, you'll go right back to Connecticut.
Massachusetts.
You'll go right back to your old way of life, just as it was. Well, our lives are changed forever, Mrs. Overstreet, forever. I just want my life back. Do you understand? I may never be able to go back to my way of life.
Thank God.
Patty, would you be so kind as to ask Sergeant Pembroke to come in here and escort Mrs. Frobisher out?
With pleasure, Mrs. Overstreet.
No, thank you. Damn the Yankees.
Now let me fly. Now let me fly. Now let me fly.